So I'm here to tell you a bit today about a trial we've just finished running in Manchester. I'm going to try and give a bit of a summary of a trial and a bit of some of the data that we collected around what we found out. But I'd like to try and move through those slides fairly quickly because the rest of the talk is about some of the qualitative research we did with people about how they made sense of the treatment that we offered and what their personal experience is that might lend itself better to the question that I was asked to talk about today. But if I do pass over things very quickly and people are interested, please feel free to approach me later or to email me. The area of early detection, so working with a group of people who may not have developed a full-blown threshold of a particular experience, has come from a movement of work from a group in Australia who started this sort of area of work with people with psychosis. And for many years now, that approach has been really successful and has now been part of what we've seen more recently in the last 12 months, UK service provision for people who are at high risk of developing psychosis. They're not people who have developed psychosis, but who may be at risk of developing their first episode. And having worked in that area for many years, it was very clear that this approach may have some applicability to people who reported distressing mood swings that they wanted help with. And after many years of people asking for lots of help and having extended contacts with services and not quite getting the help that they wanted or not getting help at all, we really wanted to look at whether or not we could apply this approach to people who report distressing mood swings. And the cost savings from the same report that Fiona talked about from the Macron group talk about the possibility of providing early detection to bipolar disorder in this way might save the NHS £4.5 million if that were to be rolled out across England. There are a number of different research groups who've worked on looking at this idea, who might be at risk of developing a future episode of bipolar disorder. And the particular group that we have used the criteria from is from a man called Andreas Bechdorf, who went to work in Melbourne, Australia, and tried to apply some of their models around at-risk work and to this particular group of people. So looking at people's accounts retrospectively as people were seeking help and asking for help and not receiving help, what were the sorts of experiences that they developed and that they described and wanted help with. And he talks about this particular criteria that we'll refer to in this talk as the bipolar at-risk criteria. And these are people who may report distressing mood swings that they want help with for different individual personal reasons, people who have low mood and then periods of high mood, people who may have a first-degree relative who has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and has their own depressed mood that they're experiencing themselves. The group that we work with all have to be asking for help, so they're not people that we force help upon, so they're coming to us saying, I'm distressed by these experiences, I want help with these experiences. The common sort of difficulties that people describe or report experiences are predominantly depression and low mood. So not so much the elevated mood experiences that they experience, but the depressed mood and the loss of control or their feeling that they can't predict one day to the next. We see in this group that there are lots of other different diagnosable conditions, disorders, anxiety, PTSD, lots of other things that might be going on, and lots of problems with functioning in terms of how they would like their life to be in reality compared to what it is. So it's really important when we were developing this research trial, we really wanted to think very carefully about the intervention that we provided, that it had to be ethical. We're talking about a group of people who have not yet developed bipolar disorder. It had to potentially cover a range of issues that people might present and want help with. We wanted it to be very individual and personalised to that group. It fits definitely with the expertise we have in our research group, was to be offering cognitive behavioural therapy. And after multiple attempts, as we do with research funding, we were awarded some funds to go out and research this idea on a bigger scale. So there's a big group of us that have been working on this over the last few years. At this stage of the research, the main particular questions that you're trying to ask of the group that you're going out to see is, do you want to be involved in this research? Will you stay with us over time? Is this treatment that we're offering you to half of the group, so it's a randomised controlled trial, does it suit the sort of difficulties you present and want help with? And do people basically find the treatment acceptable? Do they turn up? Do they engage? Do they report it being useful for them? And they sound very simple questions, but they're really important things that we do really well at this stage, because without doing some of that underpinning work, there's no point us going on to detect or test whether or not these treatments are effective. If people don't want them and they're absolutely useless, not useful to them on this level, it's really important that we understand more why. So we sought to detect and go out and find people who met this criteria, who were between the ages of 16 and 25, because that's this particular bar criteria that Andreas Bechdorf talks about. They were people who were seeking help from a variety of NHS, voluntary sector services, education. They're traditionally a group of people who often don't get help. They get told, you're not unwell enough for us. Then they get told by someone, we don't offer that to you. They're also typically a group who don't engage traditionally very well with sort of IAPT type services that they might be offered at this age range. And that's a national issue that those sorts of, the NHS England are looking at the moment. So when we launched the trial, we were trying to find 76 individuals who would be willing to come into the trial, half of whom would be randomised to treatment as usual. So that literally meant recording what happened to them on their journey across the lifetime of the 12 months that we were seeing them. And half of the people we offered individual cognitive behavioural therapy of a maximum of 25 sessions, with a fairly experienced clinical psychologist offering very individualised CBT. We had a number of assessments that people had to undertake, and the main thing I would point out to you is the length of that. So one of your research questions in a feasibility trial is this what people want to do? Will they fill out all these questionnaires? The particular CBT model that we use is very traditional cognitive behaviour therapy, but has taken an approach from the at-risk for psychosis world, where my background is certainly, looking at a more assertive outreach approach, working with people in a very flexible, individualised, personal way, working them in spaces and places that are meaningful to them. So seeing them at home, having flexible appointments throughout the week, seeing people in evenings around busy life schedules. So making ourselves very available and making the therapy very personal. So we don't go with pre-prescribed problems and goals that we're working on, but ask people to generate those with us. And we'll spend time with people if they're not sure what they look like. That would be an important early part of that work. Really important that we develop really trusting relationships with young people as well, because they can spot a fake a mile off. So it's really important that we're very honest and very transparent about the work that we do and how that we want to work with people, and in ways that they feel in charge. You know, I'll see you for 20 minutes. Fine, no problem. That's all we've got. That's what we'll work with. So problem lists and goal setting is a very important part of the early work. We look at doing some work taken from Warren Mansell's work on cognitive behavioural therapy for people with bipolar disorder, looking at mood continuum work, so charting people's lived experiences of their mood and their own labels for those things. We try really hard to use people's own language, that we're not coming with a prescribed set of words of how we talk about mood experiences, but use the words that people bring to us. The therapy is about making sense of those experiences, developing hypotheses that we might test as part of the therapy. Some of those might be cognitively orientated, some of them might be behaviourally orientated, and what's really important is that we take a non-stigmatising and normalising approach to the sorts of experiences people report to us and want help with. You can't see that slide because it's absolutely tiny, but essentially the take-home message is we managed to recruit our 76. We managed to, people found the treatment very acceptable in terms of people were willing to be randomised between conditions and then stayed involved in either treatment as usual or the CBT. And we retained, so essentially we managed to keep people involved in the assessments at the 6 and 12 month sort of follow-up periods very well. So we had a completion rate of about 89%, which with this particular young group is pretty impressive because they move around a lot and they change their phones a lot, and so there can be really important ways of trying to just be practical about how you keep in touch with people. And doing non-traditional approaches can be particularly important. I'm not going to talk too much about this slide, but essentially our average age of the group was 20. Sort of on this section of the table, we can see that almost 100% of the people that we had coming into our trial had previously asked for help and were still help seeking, so you could assume from that whatever help they had been given previously hadn't worked. Very high levels of previous suicide attempts. 75%. So lots of things going on and lots of difficulties that people wanted help with. We had about 75% of people completed what we would deem to be a dose of the treatment, of the intervention, which is really good in terms of it suggesting that it's very acceptable to people. People wouldn't necessarily turn up and come along if that wasn't necessarily the case, although there's still lots to learn from doing the qualitative interviews with people about why that was, or for others as well, why it wasn't particularly useful. In terms of thinking about the sort of difficulties that people had and wanted help with, the most frequent prioritised problem on people's problem list was low mood. Second was anxiety. Third was mood fluctuations and mood swings. Fifth was anger and irritability, but also high mood, but features much lower down on that list. And the joint seventh prioritised problem was around intrusive or disturbing thoughts, but also relationships with others. In at-risk type research and academia, we talk about this sort of horrible outcome of transition. So did we indeed prevent bipolar disorder? That's really important to the funders, but I don't think it's particularly important to the group of people that we were working with. A sort of binary sort of outcome of whether you did or didn't on a particular measure meet this criteria is not necessarily related to anything that's going on in your life. But from our perspective, we did well in terms of the people who were in the CBT arm certainly had a reduced risk of going on to develop bipolar disorder. But thinking about some of the more important outcomes, we had significant changes on low mood and then on functioning. But I'd like to very importantly go through some of the more important lived experience of what people found coming into the study and using the therapy. Don't know how much time, 2 minutes. Sorry, I didn't do well at that at all, did I? Okay. So what was really important, so this qualitative quotes that I'll present here represent, we invited all people that were involved in the trial to come into the qualitative interviews. We had over 20 people who were being prepared to be interviewed, and these interviews were led by, we have service user researchers in the unit that I work in. It was the topic and interview was designed by them, people with lived experience, and delivered by them. So it was sort of more peer-related interviews that went on for the qualitative work. So not feeling patronised in therapy was really important. This second one I really like because it reminds me of some conversations I have with my daughter, who's almost a teenager. I guess it's a sort of tone of voice that's often used, I find incredibly patronising, but thankfully this therapist in this trial didn't use it. That really resonates with me. Developing coping strategies in therapy was deemed to be really important. So it's been useful now. I have these strategies that can help pull back to a normal, manageable for me. It's not chipping away at the foundation. It's useful for breaking down things that are building on from and bringing it back to what's manageable. And sort of from that quote, you can sort of get a flavour of that it's personal, that it's not about an imposed, this is how you need to manage your mood and this is what normal mood should look like. The coping strategies and stuff was just learning to refocus and things like that. It does really help me. It's helped. I'm really happy about it. This is the title I gave for my talk, because I really like these quotes. Came from two different individual participants describing that therapy for them was like riding a bike with stabilisers. So I don't know, it's sort of like having the safety wheels off a bike when you first start cycling. And this other person says, you're giving me, I guess it's like riding a bike. She was my safety pedals, so she's referring to the therapist. The actual pedals you get, I guess they're kind of coming off now. I get to ride my bike on my own. You've still kind of helped me, kind of adjusted as much as I can, make as much progress to me. I continue to ride my bike all over the place without necessarily her supporting me like she was doing. We've had that slide already. People described that therapy was really important in helping people get out more, and we've heard about that this morning in terms of people having functioning and purpose in their life and things that they would like to do. This person talks about them getting out the house. I never used to go out. I would cancel appointments, rearrange appointments, constantly avoid, shop online. I really didn't want to leave the house at all. Now I go out to the house, shop myself. I never used to want to be in the shopping centre. I'm there every week now. I get the train to my partner's house, and when she comes here and stuff. Feeling comfortable in therapy was really important. So these people talk about really liking the therapist. She was friendly, felt quite comfortable. When we were meeting, I was not in a great situation with high school, so we would meet there. I just felt more comfortable with her during the sessions than not. It's friendly to feel, it's just a nice friendly feel to it. Feels very comfortable kind of way, getting to help really. People describe the positive changes that came about. So this person describes, I can see the difference of when I first started. I'm going to college now, because when I'm on a downer, I'm sort of able to pick myself up. And when I'm in a hyper, I'm not terrified of going out in case I do something risky. So that's really helped me. And in general, because obviously those particular interviews are themes that came out of people who came into the CBT arm, so got the therapy. But people in general talk about really positive experience of being involved in the trial and being involved in research. It was really important to us when we recruited young people into the trial that they were very aware that there was this 50-50 chance of getting the CBT, but what they were all doing was contributing to future NHS services that might be available to young people like them and in the future. And that was a really important motivation for people becoming involved, had a big altruistic sort of motivation for their desire to be involved in research. So very brief summary. We found that it was possible to identify this group in a UK population. It was the first time that had been done. That the prevention of first episode bipolar disorder seems an important aim. Is it achievable? we need much larger trials to test that particular idea. However, is it also important? I'm not so sure, certainly not from the participants that we had in our trial. We definitely know that current service provision is wholly inadequate, and had people who had multiple attempts to get help before they'd even come into the research trial, and obviously some of them didn't get the therapy arm that they may have wanted as well, and we're still waiting and documenting. That is a really important part of the process to really flag up to what happens to these people. Psychological intervention seemed appropriate and acceptable, and we've been doing some qualitative needs of the families and carers in this sample as well, because they're really key, especially for these young people and very involved in their lives. Thank you very much.